Get the bite, the nest.
Sometimes you gotta do things you don't want to do.
Episode 5 of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon just aired a little bit early on AMC Plus, and I just watched it, and I'm going to review it for you guys, give you my first initial reaction to this episode. Before I get too deep into this video, I'm going to let you know there's going to be some spoilers here, not a lot. This isn't going to be a play-by-play. I'm not going to talk about every single thing that happened in this episode. I'm just going to talk about the main takeaways, the main things that I liked, anything that I disliked, and a couple things in between. But also, before I get too deep into this episode, subscribe. I love The Walking Dead universe. I talk about it all the time on this page. I talk about every single episode of The Walking Dead universe as it airs, but I also talk about other TV shows, I talk about movies, I talk about survival horror video games, and in general, most of what I talk about on this page leans towards the horror genre. But anyway, I have a feeling the vast majority of audiences are going to love this episode of Daryl, but for me personally, it showed some of the highest highs, but it also showed a lot of the weaknesses that the Daryl show has as a whole. First, I'm going to talk about the main things that I like. We finally get some flashbacks of Daryl. We finally get to see the circumstances that led him to France, and I loved seeing this. It actually has Daryl in Maine, and I lost my shit. I was born and raised in Maine, and I currently live in New England. And I always just get so excited whenever the Walking Dead universe even mentions New England. And in this flashback, we see Daryl bonding with this young adult teenager kid. We see him butting heads with these local just weirdos. And on the radio, he even calls and he talks to, I believe it was Carol for a little bit. And in their very brief conversations, she mentions that someone has returned. I really, really wonder who she's referring to. I feel like a lot of people are going to assume that she's referring to Rick, but I really don't think she's referring to Rick personally. My theory is she's either referring to Michonne. I have a feeling that maybe at some point Michonne returns to Alexandria before the start of their spinoff truly begins, or at some point during her spinoff. But my main theory, who I actually believe it is I believe she's Fear the Walking Dead, spoiler here if you're not caught up on Fear the Walking Dead, but I believe that she's probably referring to Morgan, because Morgan, at the last episode of Fear, he implies he's coming back east. He's returning to Virginia to look for Rick, and obviously that would lead him to Alexandria. And then these flashbacks lead to Daryl on a ship, and this was probably my favorite sequence in the entire Daryl show so far. Seeing a giant ocean liner out in the Atlantic Ocean. There's explosions, there's great action sequences, there's an amazing scene with a variant walker, there's Daryl killing people, there's intensity, there's punch, and the direction and the writing throughout this entire sequence. That entire sequence on its own really showcased what I personally have been wanting from these Walking Dead spin-offs. Great action sequences, great character moments, and huge budget. And then in the present day timeline, Daryl in France, we also get a lot of great moments. We actually get Daryl screaming at Laurent, and it's been a long time since we got Daryl just screaming, and I miss it. I miss season 1, season 2 rageful Daryl. Obviously, he's depressed as shit overall, and he only grunts and he whispers and he talks quietly, but when he yells, I love it. It just reminds me of the OG version of the character. And seeing him yell at Laurent, calling him a little shit, was just very realistic. That's what a real human would do in that situation. But I love how Daryl apologizes to him, he sympathizes with him, and that's realistic to what Daryl would do as a character, especially at this stage of his character arc. And this episode ends with pretty much every main player in this series so far ending up at one location. We get Isabel, we get Quinn, we get Daryl there, we get Quinn's girlfriend, we get the main villain lady, the girl with the collar, we even get the tattooed face villain. Just everyone ends up at this location, and Daryl is in a pit with an audience watching him, and he's going to fight a variant. And it reminded me of way back in season 3 when the governor put Daryl against Myrtle and there was that audience watching. And someone shoots a dart at the walker and it essentially turns the walker into a variant. And I believe that confirms my question that I had was, are these people just studying variants or are they creating variants? It seems like they're the ones that are actually creating variants, as far as I can tell. They're not just studying them, they're actually creating them. But it makes me wonder, how did variants end up in Virginia and in Ohio? Did a shipping container just fall overboard and wash up on the east coast of the United States? Maybe. I have no idea. But the critiques that I have with this episode is the critiques that I have with the show overall. I just feel like this episode showcases them the most, and that's kind of unfortunate for me. And that's that this season started so strong in the narrative, in the plot, and the pacing, but with each episode as it passes, I feel like the narrative is getting a bit convoluted. I feel like there's just a few too many characters. There's too many groups with too many alliances and too many backstabs. This might just be a me thing, that I'm not following it as clearly as I should be. I have a feeling when I rewatch the show, it'll be a lot clearer. That's how I personally am with most shows and movies that I watch. But I have talked with a few other people who are watching Daryl, and they have the same critiques that I have with the plot, that as it progresses, it's getting a bit muddy, and that's unfortunate. But anyway, that's my quick and brief thoughts on the newest episode of The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon. Have you watched it yet? If you have, let me know in the comments what you thought of this episode. I have a feeling a lot of people loved it. I loved it, don't get me wrong. That critique is a minor thing in the grand scale of how much I'm enjoying this show. This episode was fantastic. Once again, consider subscribing, and yeah, thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.